Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. For everyone who's like, whoa, what's going on? Yeah, I don't really know what to tell you. My camera broke, so I was just like, sucks. Don't know if I can do long form content. Tried on my phone, my old phone, didn't really work. So I have a new phone now, way more storage and drive, I guess, to make more videos. So I am going to be doing that. This is going to be the first video of a series that I'm going to do for every single day this week, as it is Mental Health Awareness Week from the 12th to the 18th. I want to do and talk about different factors of mental health across the board in general, and today is going to be the first video talking about F1 and mental health in general. I will get a little bit more into that after I do my little preamble, which is the fact that I am sick. Yeah, here's my little tissue. I don't know if you can hear it. I have water. I'm gonna try and avoid sniffing. And I am breathing out of my mouth. I am a mouth breather for at least the next 5 days, which is always the best part about being sick. It is really truly, and my belief is it does come from having to travel into London a lot. I'm rarely sick, so it's another thing. But I do have water here also to keep me going. Yum, really good. So if you don't mind, someone who might have to sniff every now and then, a little bit of nasal, and I guess I do have to gulp a lot because when you talk, I'm talking out of my mouth, I'm breathing out of my mouth, saliva buildup. It's getting a bit disgusting, and I'm so sorry for the TMI. Also, another thing, I have written notes, and I will have to consult them. Welcome everyone to the very first video that I am going to be doing for Mental Health Awareness Week. My name is Madeline. I would define myself as a psychology research graduate as well as an actor. So I did a mental health master's and I did an undergrad in psychology. So that is 4 years I have dedicated to psychology. I currently have no steady job. It's really me working my way in between auditions as well as applying for any psychology jobs and all of that fun stuff. And I thought that a really fun video that we can do to start with mental health in general is F1 and mental health. In general, I'm not a sports psychologist. I need to say that to start off with. I am not a sports psychologist. My real interest in general, as someone who has studied psychology academically and also creates content, is how psychological knowledge, mental health knowledge, and understandings is received, digested, and reflected from the public opinion. This is my little passion project that I often find myself going into little rabbit holes, as I have all the time in the world to go down all these rabbit holes, is something that I notice, and it's all casual observation. We are here to enjoy the process of learning, and just talk a little bit more about F1. I remember when I went on live and I was talking about I'm not sure which Grand Prix it was. And someone was just like, oh, it's crazy. I wouldn't imagine that someone like you is into F1. And I get it. My aesthetic is very different. I have very different interests that are not completely aligned with F1. But nonetheless, if anyone wants to know anything about F1, let me give like some opinions. In general, F1 is one of those sports where you can like individuals but not the teams. So I don't mind most drivers. Normally I tell people I'm a Lewis fan, so I am adopted into Ferrari because I go where Lewis goes. But in terms of a collective team that I support, it is Williams. It is Williams. It always has been Williams, I guess. It was hard to see Williams lose because of the way it was going, and I think that James is probably the best thing to happen to the team. I love Alex. I love Carlos as a driver. I loved him in Ferrari, so now seeing him in Williams, I love them as a team. Yeah, I'm not a McLaren fan, which is quite funny because Lando will definitely be a point of conversation throughout all of this. I'm not a McLaren fan. In general, I'm not really a Red Bull fan either, but I do love Oscar. I love Lando. I love Yuki. I have mixed feelings about Max, but I respect him a lot as drivers. All of these drivers I really respect because, you know, to be the top of the top, like 20 in the world, and how many people are driving hoping to be an F1, it is all you can gain is respect for these people. So, with all that considered, we are definitely going to delve in deeper into what I have been doing in my rabbit hole, in understanding Formula One and mental health in general. And I guess I could start with Lando. I do have the papers that I have been consoling, so maybe I will start screen recording here so everyone can see what I can see. One of the biggest voices we see in Formula One in general when it comes to mental health is Lando Norris. Lando Norris has been very open and upfront with his struggles with mental health, specifically stuff like anxiety. I think that's a really big one that anxiety, and from what I can see, some form of low self-esteem, self-critique, rumination, all of those little things. And I'm very careful with how I am using my words, because one thing that comes from mental health being platformed, and I would say popularized, probably a misspeaking there, but definitely in some way popularized, because pop psychology is a thing, is people misplacing psychological phenomena in spaces that it shouldn't be. So overall, I think from what I understand from Lando, he is very much someone who's in his head. So the first paper I actually found, and this paper is amazing because it's published in 2024, and we love a recent paper with recent and fresh data, and that is called Psychological Risk Factors in Formula One and the Importance of Integrating Mental Health into Driver Science. Now the reason why I love this paper, not only because it's recent, it is because it has everything. It is all encompassing. It is talking not only about factors that affect drivers potentially in terms of psychology and mental health, but also how the public receive a lot of those things. It's got it all there: socioeconomic, physiological, gender, etc., etc., etc. So I do think that it's really great. And something that I think is worth mentioning when talking about sports and psychology in general, and this is no way research, I also need to probably preempt this by saying that everything I say is not in association to institutions or anything along those lines. It is really just casual research backed with opinions and things that I've drawn together in order to present the information to you. Something that I think is really important and kind of the driving force as to understanding this overall is the discrepancy between sports and mental health. Sports is interpreted, especially if you're a sports person, if you're an athlete, you are the best at what you do physically, physiologically. That is a sign of strength, and it is a measurable strength that a lot of people can understand. You are in the Olympics because your time is the best time, and you know, if you get a better time, it's all measurable. Not only physical strength but mental strength. I think it's really important to also acknowledge that a lot of sports are a lot of head games. As someone who, very casually I can relate, played all the sports, my main sport is field hockey. Love field hockey. I stopped playing recently. I played for like less than half a season, but it is a lot of mental work that you have to do in order to be a sports person. I used to do sprint, and then they try to translate me sprinting into long distance running. And one thing that really and truly I always tell people is I cannot run long distances because my head just does not let me work that hard. Like, in terms of after 10 minutes of running, I'm just like, you can stop now. You can stop. You don't have to keep on going. Like, why are you doing this? You can stop, and I will stop. And that is something that has never really motivated me to run. It's also the feeling is a bit monotonous. And as someone who has always played a team sport, the adrenaline, I need that sort of collective adrenaline. Anyways, that is all to say that a lot of sport is mental, and we understand that mental and physical go hand in hand. Your mental understanding or your mental well-being being good also affects your physical well-being, and also affects your mental well-being. They are linked, and there is definitely this discrepancy there where you understand that this person is the strongest or the best at what they do in terms of physicality, but also in terms of mentality in that realm. But then you perceive mental ill well-being or mental conditions or psychological conditions as a form of weakness, because they are definitely presented to us stereotypically in that way, and you have to unlearn the fact that mental health conditions are not a form of weakness. They're butting heads there. There's this discrepancy. How can you be strong but also quote unquote weak? Because mental health isn't actually weakness in the way that a lot of people like to frame it as. So I think that is in general particularly interesting, and what a lot of people are coming from, and this paper definitely gets into it, and it's really interesting. One thing that I learned from this is, and in general, F1 is a male dominated sport, right? And in the world, when it comes to men and mental health and how men are perceived by society, that is definitely, we all understand that men are perceived in this way, that they have to be strong, they have to be macho, they have to not have any problems. If you're a man, you have to process them internally, and overall that societal expectation of men in general is what makes them less help seeking in comparison to women, and overall what makes them not, I would say, not be able to compute mental health in the same way that not only women are, but the rest of the world is kind of trying to understand. And I can only imagine how different it is to be in a sport like Formula One, where most of it is, a lot of it is how good you are at the sport, but also some of it is marketing, right? Liking, whether people like your driver or not, is kind of a big deal. It's kind of important. You are not only selling how good you are as a driver, you're kind of selling yourself in the public eye. So that stuff is also important, and it's very fascinating to see Lando, who is, he was leading the driver at the time of recording this. He's no longer leading the championship. It's Oscar Piastri now, but he is second, who is quite loved by most people, but he is definitely receiving a real pressure of criticism and hate from people. And one thing that people will often jump to first in terms of critiquing him is his mental health. And I wrote it here in a tweet. I'm gonna put it up. It's not a tweet, it's a Blue Sky, but it's the same thing, but Blue Sky is better. And it reads, "The hate Lando Norris receives is unnecessary. I'm not even a McLaren fan, but this is too much. Hope the best for his mental health. I respect how open he is about it. The toxic part of sports communities are the worst," which is true. The toxic part of anything is the worst. Nothing toxic is ever good. And someone actually replied to this, and they said, "I don't hate Lando, but boy does he F up, and he should stop playing the mental health card. It's his job to drive fast. He gets millions. Love him, but man up, boy." Misread. And I then replied, this is me really going back and forth with my tweet replies, but I said, even if he does F up, people are doing way too much. Also, mental health isn't a card. Everyone has mental health. It's unfair to weaponize him being open about his emotions as weakness, which is what I see a lot of people do. I do think that he is in his head, and once he gets out of there, he'll be good. And then that was pretty much the end of that sort of segment of the interaction. And I think I stand by everything I kind of say, because I think people misunderstand what mental health is. Mental health isn't one person doesn't have mental health and you don't have. Everyone has mental health, but the condition of your mental health changes. So if you're gonna be like, oh, you have mental health, that is actually not a correct statement. And anyone who tells you that statement is correct is wrong. But yeah, we all have mental health. But the fascinating thing when it comes to understanding Lando and his position with mental health is that he definitely gets the back end of it because he is open about it, right? What people don't know, they can't weaponize against you. And especially as a man in a male-dominated sport, even though the receiving end of people who watch Formula One isn't necessarily male-dominated, because we have seen in general, as F1 has progressed, a real shift in who consumes F1. And a lot of people who consume F1 are actually young women, and we are seeing a change and a shift in also the drivers when it comes to F1, because F1 Academy came out, etc, etc, etc. All that to say is, what people don't know, they can't weaponize against you. So now or in general, how Lando has put mental health and awareness for mental health at the forefront of a lot of his, I would say, personal marketing, because he is someone, all F1 drivers have a form of marketing that they do because that is who they are. They have to present themselves in a certain way. But most people will recognize that Lando is very open about mental health and mental health awareness. People could weaponize that against him. And I wonder, and it is to say, would that be the same if he wasn't a man, if he wasn't in F1, etc., etc.? And one thing that I see a lot of people say, and this person says it here, like, it's his job to drive fast, he gets millions. And I saw another thing that someone said. They said, who cares if he feels anxious about something? He earns millions. And I'm gonna sneeze. We are back. My eyes are gonna start tearing up a little bit because the sneeze was so strong. But one thing I've seen, as I was saying, one thing I've seen a lot of people talk about when it comes to mental health in general, specifically to do with Lando, is that man earns millions. Why should I care? Why should I care if he's anxious? Why should I care if he overthinks? Why should I care? He earns so much money. Who cares? And I think this is where your understanding of the human experience and the differences that we all have has to break that mold. It is less about his material things in life and rather understanding the shared experience that we all have collectively as being human beings and living this life on this earth, right? And one thing I will always champion people for, I mean, I guess I did 4 years of psychology, so I have to, but one thing I will always champion people for who do have a wide range, a wide platform, is platforming their humanity. And one way that you can always do that is by talking about mental health in a way of vulnerability, because like I said, people will and can weaponize that against you, because we are still living in a world where stigma is rising. So back to the research paper. This paper was really good. It also has a general call out for more F1 specific assessments, research and interventions. And I often wonder how sports psychologists and people would do that, because yeah, I'm just not in that world. There is also this paper, and I'm scrolling like an idiot when I can just type in the thing, and it's Behind the Visor, a qualitative exploration of psychological skills of Formula One race car drivers. Now this paper is quite old. Normally when we consolidate or whatever, look into research, you want to be looking at the 5 range mark, and then after that, the most you could do, when I was doing my undergrad, the most that they would allow is 10 years. When I was doing my masters, it was 5. So we're really on the edge of the relevance of this paper. But I do think that this overall is interesting. They interview actual F1 drivers, and they talk about psychological skills. And one thing that I think is really important, they talk about stuff like pre-race routine, planning, etc., etc. But the people that are interviewed also mentioned that, and this is just a really massive sidebar, that if a driver is fearful, then he shouldn't be driving. Like, if you are fearful of in any capacity, you shouldn't be driving. And I think that's really fascinating, because F1 is one of those sports that it can unfortunately end your life. We have seen that happen many times. It is very dangerous, and the drivers would say, if you're afraid of the danger, you shouldn't be doing that. That shouldn't be something that should be at the forefront of your mind. But in terms of psychological skills, they talk about some of them had every time I want to say console, I just kind of mess it up. Some of them have seen a sports psychologist, and others have actually seen or had interacted with psychological services, but majority of them in this paper, at least, and in this sample, had not. They had come up with their own ways to overcome specific aspects of mental health in general. And some of them actually do mention, if I console my notes here, that psychological skills were not emphasized at their time, and they were just unaware of its importance. And I think it's really funny, because we now have experienced and seen the shift that it is important. It's always going to be important. And how when someone like Lando platforms its importance, sometimes that gets used against him. But at the time, it wasn't seen as important. And I also think it's worth mentioning, and it's something that the drivers in this specific paper also mentioned, is that even if the psychological or mental well-being aspect of it is important, it is not the most important. It is just part of that mixture of factors that lead to succeeding and not succeeding. Especially with F1, we are talking about tenths of a second, very small details. And psychology, mental well-being, and all of that stuff is just part of all of those small details that can, make or break you. So I thought that was particularly interesting. These are the 5 things that I have been reading, I guess, in terms of research, in terms of understanding everything to do with mental health, specifically in sport, F1, but this one particularly is about stigma, and I think that is the one thing that we're seeing, especially when it comes to Lando Norris, the stigma that drives it. Here we have Acceleration Awareness of Mental Health in Motorsport. This one is also really good because it's from 2024, and it's great because it talks about how people are destigmatizing mental health in general and the shift that we have made, because in the paper mentions that in 2014 Mercedes did hire a psychiatrist, to help with the pressure. And it's actually funny because there's a quote from Lewis Hamilton in 2014 that he does not need it. He does not need it unless he goes quote unquote crazy. And even using that terminology in order to refer to mental health in that way is already stigmatizing. And now we see that shift in how we approach and talk about it, because Lewis Hamilton has definitely opened up with his feelings and experience with depression. So Mercedes did, and Toto Wolff has also done a really good job in making sure he talks about mental health in a very careful and understanding way. Sebastian Vettel has also done that, where he spoke about how mental health has been perceived and can be perceived as weakness when it's not. This paper, which is from March 2025, speaks about a very infamous thing that happened in the beginning of the season, which is Helmut Marko saying that Isaac Hadjar did have a little bit of a cry after a crash that was a bit embarrassing. And that is referred to Isaac Hadjar crashing his car during the formulation lap in the Australian Grand Prix. If I remember, it was the first race of the season. And whether in the paper it mentions whether he was talking about the crash in general or Isaac Hadjar's reaction, the word embarrassing is a problem, right? The perception of what is happening is a problem, because in the first paper they speak about these high intense, high pressure situations, contracts being signed when you have to race, when you don't have to race. All of this stuff is pressure and it is stressful, and for you to even break a little bit is to break a lot. Again, we're working in very small details, so it did not seem fair for Helmut Marko to have this commentary on who Isaac is in general, or how he reacts to these things, because it's high pressure, high stakes, and high pressure, high stakes, the smallest scratch feels like a gash. So it is one of those things, and that's how we know that harmful stigma still exists. And even if it doesn't exist from the public eye, which it does, it can still exist in the spaces that these people are operating in. I also read this paper, which is Mental Health in F1, the Still Unseen Side of an Elite Sport. I think this paper is from 2021, yeah. There you go, it's from 2021. This paper is really good, or article is really good, in showing, the different things that people have said about mental health in general. We have quotes from Daniel Ricciardo, George Russell, and in George Russell in general, when you watch the latest season of Drive to Survive, we actually see him have, I believe it was heat stroke, but it elicited some sort of reaction that was very reminiscent and looked very close to a panic attack. Even to put that is very, very strong statement in general. But all is to say, concluding statement, all is to say that in general, F1 is this very high and elitist sport. And for someone like Lando Norris to come and be very open and vocal about something such as mental health is a concluding statement, not only to who he is as a person, but also to how we as the people, as the public, should perceive the way these people are presenting themselves. And I think when we go back to my initial question, which is how is psychology slash mental health information and knowledge and understanding received, digested, and reflective in the public eye, when we're looking at Lando, we see that that discrepancy between the two groups who are digesting what Lando is putting out. On one hand, we see people being very considerate of Lando's mental health, understanding that that is an aspect that he has been very open about, and that is something that does contribute to how he performs overall. And then we also see an extreme side of that, in which there is no accountability given to Lando, and he just is not responsible for anything because he has mental health, and I would always or something going on. And then we have the other side where people, such as the person who commented on my thing, said, love him but man up, which is that toxic masculinity that actually affects men, and how they are able to be upfront and open about their mental health because of the way that people are putting on these stereotypical ideas of what men should be like, and it just only further perpetuates the stigma that mental health is weakness. I think overall we are seeing a shift in how people understand and perceive mental health in general. And one thing I often like to talk about or understand is that we are all understanding mental health at different rates and different levels. In general, when sports, for example, let's say football, when football decides to platform and understand the importance of mental health, is not going to be the same as when F1 does it, and it's not going to be in the same way, and it's going to be at different varying rates for different varying people, and how much the public want to understand a certain person's mental health in comparison to another person. We are all understanding mental health at different rates, which is really fascinating, because eventually we come to conclusive ideas on people in general, and ideas on psychological or mental health conditions in different ways, and it all kind of trickles down, and how it trickles down does affect how we understand these things. And one thing I often talk about is how we distort these things. This is less to do with a distortion in relation to F1, especially when it comes to Lando, but rather more of the textbook understanding of mental health in general, and how it's perceived in men, how it's perceived in sport, how it's weaponized against men, and how that weaponization probably goes harder for men in sports who are also wealthy. And, just bringing it back to that roundabout point of mental health is something that we all have. So it is really about understanding how we as the public receive this form of information and how people interpret it. And I think with sports is very specific, and it's all to do with what I mentioned before, the discrepancy between the strongest people seen in society in terms of athleticism, and the perception of what people have as what mental health is, and how those affect how we treat or how we platform certain people. How Lando is platformed in comparison to someone who would never really speak about their mental health, my first thought goes to Max Verstappen, is completely different. So I think it's one thing to just really acknowledge and understand on how we are perceiving mental health overall in general, and how we treat those people, how we use their openness about mental health against them. I think that is really the main thing here. I think I respect Lando in all honesty. I mean, I spent 4 years studying psychology. Of course, I'm going to respect anyone who is open about their mental health. But it's another thing to understand how the public will take that and pretty much rip you apart from it. Whether you love him or hate him, whether you think he takes accountability or not, whether you think he's a good driver or not, that doesn't actually refute the fact that he is very open about something that is very human and very natural to the lived experience, and that is a point of respect at minimum. So yeah, thank you all for coming and hear me ramble for like half an hour about F1 and mental health perception, and understanding how that affects not only how we perceive men, but how we perceive these men who are in this very high elitist sport, and how that affects everyone. And I'm so sorry that I'm very violently ill, because it's just not cute. And I hope that my mouth breathing and mouth noises and sneezing and all that random stuff doesn't affect how you consume the information. Overall, I'm going to be leaving some links to very important mental health charities and resources that people may need in order to be, to get through, to get by. And yeah, I will see you next time, where I'm going to be talking about another sector of life in general and its relation to mental health. So I will see you guys later. Bye.